The draft board just flipped, and nobody saw this coming. For years, Azzi Fudd was viewed as a lock, the next big thing, the kind of player you pencil in as a future #1 pick without even thinking twice. Elite shooting, big game pedigree, and the backing of one of the most dominant programs in basketball. It felt automatic. But now that certainty is gone. Because new projections, insider whispers, and growing analyst debates are all pointing in the same direction. Her stock isn't just slipping, it's being seriously questioned. And the timing couldn't be more brutal. This is happening right as the WNBA is entering a new era. A faster, more demanding, more talent-loaded era led by players like Caitlin Clark, who didn't just raise the bar, she completely changed it. Suddenly, being elite at one thing isn't enough anymore. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because for Fudd, the conversation is shifting from future superstar to something much more uncertain. Some analysts are starting to question whether her dominance was amplified by the system around her. Others are pointing to gaps in her game that weren't as obvious before. Now, to be clear, none of this means she isn't talented. Far from it. But in a draft where teams are hunting for franchise-changing players, even small doubts can turn into big consequences. And once those doubts enter the conversation, they spread fast. Because this isn't just about one player falling down a draft board. It's about a changing standard, a new expectation, and a realization that in today's game, nothing is guaranteed anymore. Just a year ago, this wasn't even a debate. Azzi Fudd was viewed as untouchable, a projected top pick, the kind of prospect scouts don't overthink. Elite shooter, high IQ, proven winner at UConn, it all felt like a guaranteed path straight to the top of the draft. There were no real questions, no real doubts, just expectations. And that's exactly why what's happening now feels so shocking. Because suddenly, her name isn't being mentioned at the very top anymore. Instead, reports suggest she's slipping, not dramatically falling off a cliff, but enough to raise serious concern, enough to make teams pause, enough to turn what once felt automatic into something uncertain. And in draft conversations, that kind of shift is everything. Because once hesitation enters the room, it spreads. Scouts start digging deeper, analysts start comparing, front offices start asking tougher questions, and before you know it, the narrative changes completely. Now, instead of future franchise player, the conversation becomes, is she really the best option? And that's a dangerous place to be. Because the draft isn't just about talent, it's about perception. And right now, perception around Fudd is evolving fast. Some reports suggest teams are starting to reevaluate her ceiling. Not her skill, her ceiling. The difference between being a great player and being the player you build everything around. And in a class filled with high-upside prospects, that distinction matters more than ever. What makes this even more surprising is that nothing dramatic triggered this shift. No single bad performance, no major collapse, no headline moment. It's been quieter than that. More subtle. A slow accumulation of questions that were always there, but are only now being taken seriously. And once those questions reach the surface, they're hard to ignore. Because in today's draft environment, being safe isn't enough anymore. Teams aren't just looking for reliability. They're looking for transformation. And if there's even a small doubt that a player might not reach that level, that's all it takes for the board to start moving. And right now, it's moving fast. But here, where things start to get uncomfortable. Because this isn't just about Azzi Fudd. It's about where she comes from. UConn Huskies women's basketball. For years, UConn has been the gold standard. Championships, elite coaching, consistent dominance. if you played there and succeeded, it almost guaranteed you'd be viewed as a top-tier prospect. That was the formula. But now, that formula is being questioned. There's a growing conversation, quiet at first, but getting louder, that players coming out of UConn might be benefiting from the system more than people realized. That the structure, spacing, and coaching elevate players in ways that don't always translate directly to the next level. Now, to be clear, this isn't a proven fact, but it's a narrative that's gaining traction. Some scouts believe that in a system like UConn's, players don't always have to create their own offense. They don't always have to carry the full weight of a team. The system does a lot of the heavy lifting, getting players open looks, controlling tempo, and putting them in positions to succeed. And when that support system disappears, that's where the real test begins. There's been growing speculation that this is exactly what teams are now trying to evaluate with FUD. Not just what she can do inside a perfect system, but what happens outside of it. Because at the pro level, things are different. Defenders are faster, stronger, smarter. And systems don't hide weaknesses the same way. That's why you're starting to hear certain phrases pop up more often. System player, frontrunner, benefits from structure. Not necessarily as direct criticism, but as questions that teams are trying to answer before making a major decision. And once those questions are attached to a prospect, they're hard to shake. Because now, it's not just about how good you are when everything is working. It's about whether you can still dominate when it's not. And for the first time in her career, that's exactly what's being asked about FUD. Which is why this shift feels bigger than just a draft ranking. It feels like a complete reevaluation. And this is where things start to feel a little too familiar. Because when scouts look at Azzi Fudd right now, one name keeps quietly coming up in conversations. Katie Lou Samuelson. Now, on the surface, that might not sound alarming. Samuelson was dominant in college, a star at UConn, big numbers, big moments, the kind of player who looked like a guaranteed pro-level scorer. At one point, she was averaging around 20 points per game on elite teams that barely lost. She looked like a sure thing. But when she reached the WNBA, things changed. Her role shrank, her production dropped. Instead of becoming a franchise centerpiece, she settled into more of a complementary role, a solid contributor, but not the star many expected. And that's exactly the comparison that's starting to make teams nervous. Because when you line up the profiles, there are similarities, both elite shooters, both highly efficient within a structured system, both playing on dominant UConn teams that create space and opportunity. And now, some reports suggest scouts are asking a difficult question. Are we seeing the same story again? Now, to be clear, this isn't a guarantee. It's speculation. But it's the kind of speculation that can completely shift how a prospect is viewed. Because the fear isn't that FUD won't be good. It's that she might be limited. That instead of becoming the player you build a franchise around, she becomes the player you add to a team that's already built. And in most drafts, that's valuable. But at the very top, that's risky. Because when you're picking number one, you're not just looking for production. You're looking for impact. You're looking for a player who changes everything the moment they step on the floor. And if there's even a chance that a prospect might follow a path similar to Samuelson, great in college, solid in the pros, but not transformative, that's enough to make front offices hesitate. And hesitation is all it takes for the board to shift. But here's the issue that keeps coming up again and again. And it might be the biggest red flag of all. Azzi Fudd can shoot, nobody is denying that. In fact, that's what made her so dangerous for so long. Give her space, and she can completely take over a game. Catch and shoot, off movement, quick release, elite. But at the next level, That's not enough. Because in the WNBA, defenses don't just give you clean looks, they take them away. They stick to you, they force you to create something out of nothing, and that's where the concern starts to grow. Reports suggest that scouts are increasingly focused on one question: can she create her own shot consistently? And right now, that answer isn't as clear as teams would like. Because when you break down her game, most of her scoring comes within the flow of the offense. Screens, ball movement, designed plays, situations where the system helps her get open. But what happens when that system disappears? What happens when a defender stays glued to her, denies every clean look, and forces her to go one-on-one? That's the scenario teams are worried about. Some analysts believe she hasn't shown enough ability to break down defenders off the dribble, create separation, or generate offense under pressure at an elite level. Not because she can't improve, but because it hasn't been a consistent part of her game yet. And for a potential #1 pick, that's a serious concern. Because at the top of the draft, teams aren't just looking for players who can finish plays. They're looking for players who can start them. Players who can control the pace, collapse defenses, create opportunities not just for themselves, but for everyone else on the floor. And if a player relies too heavily on others to set them up, it limits their ceiling. Now, to be fair, this doesn't mean Fudd can't succeed. Far from it. She could become an elite scorer in the right system. But that's exactly the point. If success depends on the right system, then teams have to ask themselves a tough question. Is that really who you take at #1? Because in today's game, the top pick isn't just expected to fit into the system. They're expected to be the system. But here's the moment everything really changed. And it has nothing to do with Azzi Fudd directly. It's about Caitlin Clark. Because when Clark came into the spotlight, she didn't just dominate, she redefined what dominance looks like. Deep range, elite ball handling, playmaking under pressure, the ability to create offense from absolutely nothing. She didn't just play the game. She bent it. And once that happened, the expectations for top prospects shifted overnight. Before Clark, being an elite shooter on a winning team, especially from a powerhouse program, was often enough to justify being a top pick. Efficiency, consistency, and system success carried a lot of weight. But now, that's not the standard anymore. Now teams are asking a different question. Can you control the game? Can you create offense when nothing is there? Can you carry a team when everything breaks down? And that's where the comparison starts to hurt. Because while Fudd is an elite shooter, Clark is an offensive engine. She doesn't wait for the game to come to her, she forces it to change around her. She dictates pace, creates opportunities, and generates scoring chances not just for herself, but for everyone on the floor. That's the new blueprint. And according to some reports, teams are now prioritizing that type of player more than ever. Not specialists, creators. Players who can be the system, not just thrive inside one. Now, to be fair, this doesn't mean Fudd can't succeed at the highest level. But it does mean the bar has been raised. Because in a draft class where teams are looking for franchise-changing talent, the definition of #1 pick has evolved. It's no longer just about who's the most polished or the most efficient. It's about who can take over a game completely. And once that standard is set, everyone else gets measured against it. Which means Fudd isn't just competing against other prospects anymore. She's competing against a new expectation. And right now, that expectation is higher than ever. And now we get to the real debate that's dividing scouts. Not whether Azzi Fudd is good, but how good she can actually become. Because in draft rooms, there are two words that carry massive weight: floor and ceiling. And right now, FUD might be the perfect example of that conflict. On one hand, her floor is incredibly high. There's a strong belief that she'll be a solid pro for years, a reliable scorer, a player who fits into almost any system, someone who can space the floor, knock down shots, and contribute on a winning team. That's valuable. Very valuable. But here's the problem. That might also be the limit. Because when teams look at her ceiling, the conversation changes. Some reports suggest that her upside isn't viewed in the same tier as other top prospects, not because she lacks skill, but because her game doesn't naturally project into a dominant, takeover-style presence. And at the top of the draft, that matters more than anything. Because if you're picking number 1, you're not just looking for someone who will be good. You're looking for someone who can be great. Someone who can become the face of your franchise, the player everything runs through, the one who changes your entire trajectory. And that's where the hesitation comes in. Because while FUD offers certainty, other prospects offer possibility. Higher risk, but much higher reward. Players with more athleticism, more creation ability, more raw tools that could eventually turn into something special. And in today's league, teams are starting to lean toward that risk. Now, to be fair, choosing upside over certainty doesn't always work out. We've seen plenty of high-potential players fall short. But when a team is rebuilding, playing it safe can feel just as dangerous as taking a gamble. Because safe doesn't always win championships. Safe doesn't always change a franchise. And that's the dilemma. Do you take the player you know will be good, or the player who might be great? And right now, that question is exactly why FUD's position on the board is starting to slip. Because in this draft, potential is winning the argument. But there's one more factor that teams almost never ignore. And it might be the quietest concern of all. FUD's availability. Because talent gets you drafted, but availability keeps you on the floor. And over the past few years, injuries have been a recurring part of her story. Not one single catastrophic moment, but enough missed time to raise questions, enough interruptions to slow development, enough to make scouts pause and think long-term. Now, to be clear, injuries happen to a lot of players. That alone doesn't define a career. But in a draft environment where teams are investing heavily, especially at the top, durability becomes a major part of the evaluation. Because when you're picking early, you're not just drafting a player. You're drafting reliability. And that's where the concern starts to build. Some reports suggest teams are quietly factoring in how much time she's missed during key development years. While other prospects were gaining reps, refining their handles, expanding their offensive skill sets, FUD was, at times, forced into recovery and rehab. And that gap, it matters. Because development isn't just about talent, it's about repetition, experience, adjusting to physicality, learning how to handle pressure over time. And when those reps are limited, it can slow how quickly a player adapts to the next level. Then there's the physical side of the game. The WNBA is faster, stronger, more physical than college basketball. Defenders don't just contest shots, they body you, push you off spots, and force you into uncomfortable positions every possession. And some analysts believe that's another question mark. Not whether she can handle it, but how quickly she can adjust. Because if a player already struggles at times with physical pressure at the college level, the jump to the pros can be a serious challenge. Now again, none of this guarantees anything negative. But when you combine injury history with questions about physical readiness, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is the last thing teams want at the very top of the draft. Because at that level, every risk is magnified. So when you put everything together, the draft slide, the system questions, the comparisons, the shot creation concerns, the injuries, it starts to paint a very different picture of Azzi Fudd than what we were told just a year ago. But here's the truth. This isn't a story about a player falling off. It's a story about the game moving forward. Because Fudd is still elite, the shooting is real, the talent is real, and there's a very strong chance she becomes a long-term impact player at the pro level. That hasn't changed. What has changed is what teams are looking for. The WNBA is evolving fast, faster than ever, and players like Caitlin Clark have accelerated that shift in a way nobody expected. The league now prioritizes creators, playmakers, and players who can completely take over games, not just fit into them. And that's where the disconnect happens. Because Fudd doesn't project as that kind of player, at least not yet. Now, to be fair, that doesn't make her a bad pick. It just makes her a different kind of pick. The kind of player who thrives in the right situation. The kind of player who can be a key piece on a championship team. The kind of player coaches love because she does her job at a high level every single night. But at number 1, that's where things get complicated. Because the top pick isn't just about reliability anymore. It's about identity. It's about taking a player who can change the direction of your entire franchise and betting everything on that upside. And right now, some reports suggest teams aren't sure Fudd fits that mold. Not because she lacks skill, but because the league is demanding something more. Something bigger. So the real question is whether Azzi Fudd will succeed. It's whether she was ever meant to be the face of a draft like this. Because in a different era, she might have been the obvious choice. But in today's game, nothing is automatic anymore. And the draft board is starting to reflect that reality.